Hi, I'm going to read a little bit of Appalachian love story from the preface, and then a short section about meeting the family and getting to be friends with them. I hope you'll like this as much as my wife and I have liked living and writing it. Title of the preface is Stingy Little Envelopes. At our weekly poker game the other night, one of my favorite players, a specialist in getting my goat, became piqued at something I said and nailed me with a label. With vermilion face and stentorian voice, he interrupted the flow of betting with, "You liberals all sing the same boring song." Now here's a guy who could make calling a hand of Texas Hold'em sound like a proclamation from a Supreme Court justice. Here's a guy who knows. In reply, I raised his bet, got myself a can of decaf Coke, took a discreet helping of low-fat chips, and thanked him not to label, stamp, and slip me into one of his stingy little envelopes. I felt better, but he won the hand anyhow. He usually does. But it occurs to me now, as I revise this introduction to Appalachian love story, for I don't know which time, what he said has a direct tie to what I've been trying to write. A little book about opening. It strikes me as nuts that as the world gets more accessible and communication nearly instantaneous, prejudices seem to be increasing. The urge to label growing stronger, and our ability to open ourselves to others narrowing. It's weird, isn't it? I guess that's why I hope you'll just open this book and enjoy it as an expanding story of two families and a place. Mine, born and raised in Chicago, with Yiddish-speaking parents and grandparents who lived above our kosher bakery in a 99% Jewish neighborhood, and later growing with Jan, a girl who had been measuring pant lengths in her father's menswear business since she was 10 years old. We married, brought 3 sons into the world, and surprised everyone who knew me by getting a Northwestern University PhD. And a second family, Appalachian for 150 years, born-again Baptist, farm-raised and backwoods educated, who brought their 2 sons into the world at about the same time as ours. Is the meeting of our 2 families a recipe for comedy, social disaster, or something more complicated in between? My way has always been to see the comic side of events. The more frightening, the more necessary it is for me to gild it with a joke of some kind. Just such an event is the episode in this book describing my wife's manic months in the summer of '04, our first in the mountains, brought on by her collision with Mother Nature, a temporary TKO, by the way, for mother. I'm sure that the episode was every bit as frightening as I let on here, but I'll bet my bagels to your beehives that although I insisted on its being funny, even at the time we were stumbling our way through it, it grows significantly funnier in retrospect. To whatever my punishment for the sin of exaggeration, I say in Yiddish, "Größ gedilla." English translation, big deal, or so what? Nobody's going to die from a little stretching. If we try to see events as they occur in our mingled lives as a little ridiculous, memory written large gives all of us a way of laughing and insulates us from some of the bitter stuff that went on at the time. Even a little experience shows us that the ugly inevitably will intrude its horned head, and if we laugh, we might even laugh it into submission. I think I learned this attitude from my maternal grandmother, Bobby Chama. Try clearing your throat and you got the first sound of her name. Chama, just under 5 feet tall, who went through a variety of pogroms and then lost most of her family in Mr. Hitler's attempt to cleanse his world of our little portion of humanity, as well as any others that seemed deficient to him, and who fled Russia to the United States without a nickel or an English word, who built a family and a business in her adopted land and used as her anchor, Lach a bissel kinderlach, translation, my children, laugh a little, whenever life ran sour. She always followed this by, nicht so gefährlich, it's not so bad. It, I came to understand, was anything not life-threatening. Can allemal sein Ärger, it can always be worse. The comic perspective is the way she kept sane. No, happy. She remembered an event that happened to her in Russia when she was 11 years old. She and her younger sister were hiding under their house during one of the raids by Cossacks, who would ride into the shtetl, burn down a few houses, and rape whatever females they could find. Age did not matter. This time, as they were about to leave, one of them came over and looked under the house. He crawled in and reached for the 9-year-old. My Bubbe had stolen an old pistol and had it with her. She aimed it at him. In Russian, she calmly told him that if he came any closer, she would blow off his head. He might manage to get her sister, but he would die. He believed her, crawled back out, got on his horse, and left. When she told us the story, the point she stressed was not how horrible the episode was, but how stupid was the confused and frightened look on his face as he saw a little girl with so big a gun. A zhlub, oaf, in a fancy uniform is still a zhlub, became one of our favorite sayings. She topped it off with a balagula, a truck driver. Ist olamol, a balagula. And then she'd laugh. A guy with a bozo mentality is always a guy with a bozo mentality, no matter his uniform or where he's from. It's a lesson that informs our story. While writing, I've seen more clearly that I've been following her advice ever since I was a pudgy, bespectacled little kid. Certainly since my father came close to his first bankruptcy, and a few years later, when he came near again and was simultaneously stricken with severe heart problems. At the time, I was a young teenager growing up in Chicago. I knew this two-punch was deadly serious, but I was petrified. And after the first shocks of seeing him lying in bed with a family doctor bent over him, holding the biggest needle I'd ever seen, and the wild ride following the ambulance to the hospital, my way of helping my folks recover was to try and create comic scenes. Caricatures more or less accurate of the hospital staff, and later when Dad came home to offer gifts of silly, semi-pornographic pillboxes that he proudly used and showed off to his friends and customers in his new life. In his new line of work as a furniture salesman. Since he could not carry anything heavier than a sample case, I would go with him after school carrying his most important sample chair. We would walk into the store, he before me dressed in a brand new suit like a pasha, me, his bearer, ceremoniously carrying a chair over my head, which I would plunk down before the buyer. And then I would bow a deep bow. Most of the buyers got a charge out of this episode in a day filled with worries. Some even gave Dad enough time to make his pitch. A few bought. And even before those tough times, as a much younger and much chubbier child, not fully understanding what was wrong in our family, but knowing that something was making my mother and father terribly nervous and sad, I played the fool. It Turns out the cause of their anxiety was dual. My parents' business going south, not a happy direction for northern urban first-generation veterans of the Depression American Jews. And they're also being unable to sell at any price a falling apart three-flat building they had bought on the recommendation of a millionaire guru, our Uncle Harry. The family